There are always classes in schools that are more difficult. You always have more difficult groups and less difficult groups. Yeah, think of the students as clients. You always have more demanding and less demanding clients. The same way that some teachers are more demanding and some teachers are less demanding. In fact, if you look at it from the teacher's perspective, very often the more demanding teacher is the better teacher. Not always, but very often the more demanding teacher is the better teacher. And it's interesting that we accept demanding from the perspective of the teacher, but we don't accept demanding from the perspective of the student. That it's not the same on both sides. The teacher can be demanding, but the students can't. I think in general that good students and good parents are always demanding. Now, you can find examples and exceptions within that, but from my perspective, I want my students and my clients to be demanding of me. I want that because that shows me they have an interest in their future. If my clients were not demanding, that shows me they don't have any interest and they don't care. And from the perspective of parents, parents need to be demanding of schools because if parents are not demanding, then schools are not accountable to anybody. And in general, throughout history, the more failure that exists in schools, the more money the schools can request from governments. So it's necessary that parents are demanding and they keep the school accountable for the education of their children. And good students are the ones that question the system. I don't mean that they make problems because there's a difference between asking an intelligent question and asking a stupid question, right? So I think that demanding can be as good as it is bad. I think what you said is really important. You both asked the question and answered the question in what you said. Number one, they have Spanish before, which is demanding, so they're tired. How long can we expect anyone to focus on anything? It, it's uh, it's complex. What is it? Studies show the average person can only focus for 8 to 12 minutes on anything. Um, so they're asked to focus for one class, which may be 45 minutes to 1 hour. They finish that, then they have to go to another class. It's the afternoon. They're also tired because it's in the middle of the day and they had to get up early and they had other classes to study. And if we asked adults to do the same thing that we ask children to do, the adults would say, no way, I'm not doing that. That's crazy.
Yep.
So it's understandable that the students have a problem with this. When you have a conflict, it's never because of what is happening here and now. When you have a conflict, it's because if you are in control of yourself and what you are doing and what you are saying, then you can avoid the conflict here and now. And most people want to avoid conflicts. So what happens when there's an explosion is that 99% of the time, there are exceptions, but 99% of the time, it's because of something else happening somewhere else. Um, Let me give you some kind of analogy or example. It's the the river. Here's one from here. The local river um, here, which is about 200 meters away from the house. The local river here floods. Yeah, which means the water comes over the edge of the river and it covers over the golf course and the park and the roads, and you can imagine the situation, right? Now, when the river floods, it's not because of what's happening here. It's because in the mountains in the spring the snow is melting. because of the warmer temperatures. And that causes more water to go into the smaller rivers, which meet and goes down into the bigger rivers, and it leads to a bigger volume of water going down towards the sea. And then when the sea level rises because of tides going up and down naturally, when the high tide sea level meets the melting snow coming down from the mountains, there's this really high level of water, and that causes the flood here. And that's the analogy for the fact that when there's a conflict, it's never because of what is happening now. It's all because of something else somewhere else. A lot of students get into conflicts at school because of problems they bring from home. They live in a high stress, high tension environment at home. They bring it into the school and they explode in school, not because of what's happening in school, but because of what's happening at home. Teachers sometimes explode at students, not because of what that student is doing now, but because of what all the other students have done in the past. And because of the pressures they have in their environment, the pressures they have from their work, the pressures they have from other teachers, the pressures they have from their boss, the pressures they have from society and parents. And maybe, who knows, maybe the teacher had a fight with their partner the night before and they're thinking about it and they're not focused on their work, or there's something else going on. Maybe a friend is sick or something. They can't focus on their work 100%. And so they don't have full control of their emotions. And so something happens and they explode. And so what you're describing is a classic example of there being conflicts that there don't need to be because everything is building. It's a pressure situation. Like the volcano, the pressure builds up until the volcano explodes. And what we see in the conflicts is the volcano exploding, but that's not what causes it, because it's the molten rock being pushed up from the earth crust movement under the earth. So I think it's really important to understand that when there is a conflict, what's happening at that moment is a small part of a big puzzle. Like if you're walking down the street and someone comes to you with a knife and says, "Give me your money," this conflict arises not because this person wants to steal your money, but because this person needs your money for something else happening somewhere else. And so the conflict is never the conflict, or it very rarely is. And when some problem happens somewhere, it's usually because of some other problem happening somewhere else. And when we focus on the eruption, the explosion, the conflict, we miss the bigger picture, which is, why is this happening and how do we get to this point? And it's important to understand that and to take a step back when we're in those conflicts and say to people, oh my God, what are we doing? Why are we in this conflict? How did this happen? Which is to open yourself to being vulnerable slightly, but there's no other way around or through. You have to acknowledge the fact that most conflict is avoidable and a lot of it's ridiculous. But it's really, really hard to admit that. Look, the students who bring their problems into school have problems at home. It's not that home is perfect and they come to school and they decide to make problems at school because home is perfect. They have problems at school because they have problems at home, because they have problems with their friends, because they have problems everywhere. It's not just an isolated element. And an important question, the first important question was, who is responsible? Who is responsible for this ridiculous situation? And the second important question is, who suffers? Who suffers because of this? So it's really important to understand that we know that you suffer, but we also have to acknowledge that the students, even though they maybe don't know it, are suffering as well. And that's the hardship in the situation, is that the teacher has to take the responsibility for themselves and the students, because the teacher is the adult. And the students don't have adult responsibilities in the school environment, although they may be old enough to have adult responsibilities outside of there. For example, in some countries, girls can have children at the age of 16. They become mothers. Perhaps it's too young for most women, but it's a biological state. And so girls have to deal with that element the same way that boys have to deal with their elements of maturity. Um,